All right, 1 second here. All right, welcome everyone to this Q&A. Again, want to welcome everyone to this Q&A. Question came in earlier that the question was, what do I think? What do I think of Lubavitcher Rebbe? That was the question. So my answer was that a lot of respect, certainly for who he is and what he's done. Um, what he did over the years. Big rabbinic authority. I don't think there's any question. And sent a lot of his students all over the world in general, to do Jewish outreach with people who don't know very much about Judaism. So that's a huge thing. So I don't really have so many, issues. There not with necessarily with him, but there are people who think he's a Messiah. So it's not a small group. It's definitely not a small group. They call them Mitzvochistim, they call them Messianics, right, so to speak. But at the end of the day, that's a big problem. That for sure. It's a big issue, but it's not the vast majority, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's small amounts either. And we do understand one thing, that one of the things the Messiah has to do, right, is bring in all the exiles, rebuild the temple, right, as the Rambam says. And one thing, at least the Messiah of David cannot do in the process, is die. Could be he'll die later, okay, but there are a number of things he has to do. Um, and then that person, would be considered the Messiah. Every person, let's say every generation, it's one person who potentially could be the Messiah. If the generation's not worthy, then that spark will go to someone else, the next generation. Right? But one of the things Rabbi Kiva said was that he thought Bar Kochba, or Bar Koziva, as he is called, Rabbi Kiva thought he was the Messiah. He thought he was Mashiach. When he saw that Bar Kochba was killed, then he knew he could not be the Messiah. So come to the Rambam, and the Rambam on that Gemara says that's what the halach is, meaning that anyone who wants to be um, considered the Messiah, one thing he cannot do is die. Right? The Messiah of Joseph could die. Right? He certainly could die in the process. At the end of the day, the Messiah of David will not die. Right? At least not at that point. Right? At least not at that point. So comes on the Rambam and says, the Messiah has to do certain things. Right? There are definitely things he has to do. Okay, but one of the things he cannot do is die. Right? The Messiah of David. Until certain things, are done. Now, that being said, how could some people think he was the Messiah? So there's Gemara towards the end of Sanhedrin that says that the Messiah can come from someone who's alive, but what does that mean? It means character traits of such a person. In other words, Rashi there says, he could be like, let's say, the prophet Daniel. That doesn't mean, Daniel was the Messiah, but it has certain character traits. A person's going to have certain character traits. Okay. But again, that doesn't mean that someone alive necessarily, right, is the Messiah. They have certain character traits. Okay. Right, but there it says it could be that someone's going to have character traits of someone who's passed away. Right, so someone who's no longer in this world. Now, that doesn't mean that if that person died, that person is the Messiah. Right? The bottom line is, Rashi there says, could be. Could, meaning could have character traits of such a person. Right? That person has character traits of let's say whoever, doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, does not mean that person's coming back. Right? In other words, that person coming back to be the Messiah. So, many have seemingly misinterpreted, right, what this means, but they'll claim that the Messiah can even be from someone that's dead. But there seems to be talking about character traits of somebody that has passed away. We're not talking about the person who's passed away is coming back. Yeah, that's the problem. All right, that's a misinterpretation. So that's one issue, right? One issue that's seemingly, there's a big mistake in. So many hold, if people believe that the Lubavitcher Rebbe would be the Messiah. Yeah, the problem is he can't be dead. Right? So again, so they word it out a different way. Okay. So we understand it means the person's gonna have character traits of somebody that passed away. That could be. Right? That's not a contradiction. Right? But Rabbi Akiva made very clear, as the Gemara says, you cannot die in the process. You cannot die in the process where there are certain things you need to do. So, did the Lubavitcher Rebbe bring in all the Jews to Israel? No. Did he rebuild the temple? No. Doesn't mean it wasn't a big rabbinic scholar, doesn't mean he wasn't a Torah giant of the generation. Right? But there are certain things he didn't do. There are a lot of people, didn't do that. So they would be disqualified over here. They would be disqualified from being the Messiah. Okay. So many believe that whoever thinks that he is the Messiah, that's idolatry. That is seemingly idolatry. Now, others seem to say it's not idolatry per se. It's just a crazy idea. In other words, they're misguided, very much misguided, right? But it's not idolatry. So, seemingly, you have a difference of opinion among later rabbinic authorities, whether these people, let's say better, these people are considered idolatrous or not. Right? Many would say if they believe that the Rebbe was the Messiah, so if they would ritually slaughter an animal, we couldn't eat it because they're idolaters. Right? If an idolatrous Jew, forget a non-Jew, an idolatrous Jew knew all the laws of shechita, of ritual slaughter, knew all the laws, but it's idolater. Whether a Jewish idol or non-Jewish idol doesn't really matter. It's idolater. That means you throw in the garbage. You can't eat it. Not only you can't eat it, no one can get benefit from it. Right? So many will say, someone who believes that, you can't eat from their shechita. You can't eat from, if they ritually slaughtered an animal. Others won't go that far. Others will say that it's just a crazy idea. Right? It's a crazy idea. But it's not idolatry. Right? So who's right? Right? Who's right? Well, I'll take the majority position. That's idolatry. That's clear idolatry. Yeah, and as someone would ritually slaughter an animal, he couldn't eat it. All right, what about the other opinion? It's hard to say, right? It's hard to say that just people are just wackos. I mean, you could say it, but to say they're outright, to say just, they're crazy. I'm not saying you can't make such a claim, right? It's very hard to say that. Very hard to say that, they're just crazy. The vast majority would say it's pure idolatry, right? Pure idolatry is a mistake. It's a serious mistake. Very serious mistake. Yeah. That doesn't negate the fact of who the rebbe was and what he knew. Doesn't negate that. Tremendous knowledge. Right? Everyone agrees he was a Torah giant of the generation. That's for sure. Nobody disagrees. Right? But saying he's coming back from the dead and or it's like he's still alive today, that's kind of, we don't hold that. We certainly don't hold that. Right? But again, as we said before, there are two messiahs, right? There's the Messiah of Joseph, and there's the Messiah of David. The Messiah of Joseph, there's difference of opinion in the Gemara and Sukkah, whether the Messiah of Joseph dies or not. He could die. Right? There's definitely an opinion that he could die. Right? That's clear. Doesn't mean he will. Definitely doesn't mean he will, but he could. The Messiah of David at a certain point cannot die. He can die later, after he's fulfilled what he needs to fulfill, but he cannot die before he's fulfilled what he did. Right? He cannot die beforehand. So in this case, anyone has died, according to this, as the Rambam clearly states, then you're disqualified from being the Messiah. Period. There's nothing to talk about. Right? Right? There's an issue over here. You can't die in the process. You can't die before you've done what you're supposed to do. So that would bring up, we'll just throw this out there, that would bring up about JC. He died. Not only did he die, he didn't fulfill anything that he's supposed to do as the Messiah, according to us. According to them, he did. According to the Christians, however they learn it, he fulfilled all this. Well, to us, it doesn't really matter. We don't hold that. Right? We certainly hold he didn't bring world peace. That's for sure. Right? And everything he didn't do. So therefore, he's disqualified. Right? Anybody will be disqualified. There's certain criteria you have to do. And if you don't do it, finished. Again, the Messiah of Joseph, who helps out the Messiah of David, okay, there is a possibility he could die. Doesn't mean he will. Could. Right? He certainly could. But at a certain point, the Messiah of David cannot die. He has to fulfill what he needs to do. If the Messiah of David does not fulfill what he's supposed to do, quote unquote, he's not the Messiah. Right? That's clear. I mean, it should be clear. Right? And, there's been a big problem throughout the centuries of false messiahs that have literally ripped apart the Jewish people. So it's only a small fringe. I mean, it's a significant fringe, of Chabad, of Lubavitch. It's a significant fringe. But nonetheless, it's a fringe. Not all Lubavitchers believe he's the Messiah. So you tell me there's a significant amount that do. Okay. So now, even according to that, what's their status? Are they called idolaters or not? Right? So many would say, yes, it's idolatry. It's clear idolatry. Others would say they're just crazy. It's just a crazy idea. It's a crazy philosophical, I don't know, standpoint, we would call it. Right? So there are two opinions here. It doesn't negate what the Rebbe did. Doesn't negate his level of knowledge. Yeah? Doesn't negate that. When people saying it when he was alive, so some would say, why didn't he come out and say no? Why didn't he stop them? Why didn't he make a big stink about it? Good question. But again, it doesn't take away what he knows. A lot of things they have likute sichos of times when he spoke, in the parsha or other things. I mean, it's cold. These things show, unbelievable knowledge and depth of knowledge, huge amount of knowledge. Nobody denies it. Nobody denies who he was and what his status was. Sorry, nobody denies it. Yeah, but there's a question here. As great as he was, and he knew people were saying that, why didn't he come out against him? Why didn't he stop them? Now, one answer is possibly, maybe he thought he was the Messiah. That could be. It's a possibility. Yeah, maybe he thought that. So he didn't want to stop them. Maybe he felt if he stopped them, worse things would happen. Yeah. So it could be for other reasons he didn't stop them. I don't know. But again, it's some people would say it's a knock against him for this whole significant movement over here. On the other hand, it doesn't take away from who he is. It doesn't take away from what he knows. Right? But the problem is you get all these followers. Get all these followers think he's the Messiah. That's a problem. So you can say, even if he didn't say anything or whatever, and even if he didn't believe it, the fact they came out afterwards and they're saying this reflects on him. It does reflect to a certain extent. Hey, but I want to separate two things. I want to separate this whole thing from the fact of who he was and from what he knew and from what he accomplished. Right? It's almost nowhere in the world that does not have a Chabad house. Right? Every one of the 52 states in America has a Chabad house. And people in most of the nefesh, unbelievable self-sacrifice, going to these places in the middle of nowhere. All over the world. In order to spread Torah, the Jews don't know anything. I have huge amount of respect for them. Now, others would say maybe they go out too soon, maybe they're not as polished, they should have more knowledge. Okay. Maybe you're cutting down their ability to learn because you're sending them out when they're younger. Whatever, maybe. Possibility. But they do tremendous work. Anyone who's been in the middle of nowhere and been helped by Chabad, owe them gratitude. Tremendous gratitude for what they do. You have tremendous chesed, tremendous acts of loving kindness, started with him, or started with his father-in-law, the Alter Rebbe himself, Baal Tanya. I mean, the whole Hasidus. But, he built it into a tremendous empire. Unbelievable empire. People all over the world helping Jews. Don't know anything about Torah. It's huge. It's unbelievably huge. But again, people may knock it. And they'll say, like, he should have come out and said he wasn't the Messiah. Yeah. But again, I want to separate. I don't want to, that's one thing. His knowledge and how we're respected in the Jewish world, totally different. It's a totally separate issue. No one denies his vast knowledge. Nobody denies what he knows, what he knew. Hasidus, Kabbalah, Gemara, I mean, all over well-versed. That there's nothing to talk about. This is a different issue. It's a different issue. Yeah, someone asks, why worship a Messiah? We don't have to worship him, right? He's an emissary over here, right? It's God's right-hand man and setting the world straight. So people could make a mistake. How could they make a mistake? It's a good question. And thinking he's God himself. That's the problem. That's a serious problem. So that I would say that, it's very hard to say that it is, that's truly idolatry. Because that doesn't make any sense. Right? That makes no sense. That's saying a human being is God. That's Christianity. Yeah, that is Christianity. Right? So for a Jew, of all people, to believe such a thing, I wouldn't even call it idolatry. What would I call it? I call it stupidity. Idiocy. That's why some people think it's just a crazy idea. It's not really idolatry. Why not? Because it's ludicrous. It sounds ludicrous. Sounds idiotic. It goes against major tenets of Judaism. So to say people are going to worship him like he's God himself, that's a huge problem. Now you tell me point blank, isn't that idolatry? Yeah, it's idolatry. Sounds like idolatry. But again, it goes against so many different things in Torah. So many different things in Judaism. To believe in such a thing is, I would say, is ludicrous. Yeah, think he's God himself? That's Christianity. Right? Or definitely similar to Christianity. In that sense. Right? So the question is, okay, so where does it come from? What's the answer? See, for a Jew, that makes sense. Right? But where's the only other place we know this from in general? It's Christianity. Christianity had influence, no question. Even though Judaism came first, but a major influence over Jews. Yeah, it took a lot of Jews away. Still takes a lot of Jews away today. Most people in the Messianic movements are Jews. Yeah, but Messianics today, again, not worshiping the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but I'm saying they're Christian. They're not Jews, they're Christians. They dress themselves up as Jews, do similar things like Jews, but they're Christian. Right? So that I have less of an issue with because that's Christian. And unfortunately, one of the higher ups in that movement happen to be Jews. Totally misguided Jews, but they're Jews. Right? So now the question is, so where would Jews get it from? How would they know such a thing? Or be a part of such a thing? Well, there's precedent in the world. Right? The Torah makes very clear, a false Messiah, you kill him. The Torah makes that very clear at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. You cannot have a false Messiah running around. Right? You have to judge him, and if he's guilty, you kill him. Why do you kill him? Because the repercussions are catastrophic. Because of a number of false messiahs in previous generations. Yeah, it's almost single-handedly destroyed the Jewish people. Almost. Yeah, huge problems. So that's why the Torah says, or one of the reasons, you nip it in the bud. Find out that they think they're the Messiah, if they do miracles, you kill them. You do not want to let the genie out of the bottle. When you let the genie out of the bottle, then people go crazy. And that can totally destroy Judaism. And it has. Throughout the centuries, that's happened when you had false messiahs. Totally destroyed the Jewish people in many ways. Right? But again, if the idea is out there, and it's already been there, there's a precedent. It's a bad precedent, 100%. I'm not going to say it's good, but there's a precedent. Yeah. Since there's a precedent, a precedent, they have what to rely on, quote unquote. But again, for a Jew in general, it sounds dodgy, as the English would say. Sounds very fishy, right? And again, it goes against everything we know, right? Because the Torah is all about what? The Torah is all about one God, right? One absolute God. There are no small gods, pocket gods, kind of like Greek mythology. There's one God. That's what Abraham brought to the world, right? Absolute monotheism. We start talking about a man in flesh, and that's Christianity. Could be other religions also, but seemingly it's that. So it's been around. It's been around, over 2,000 years, right? A number, they have huge numbers. Whether people follow it the way they should or not doesn't really matter, but they have a lot of numbers. Got a lot of followers. Fortunately, a lot of people have died in his name. Yeah, a lot of people have died in his name. Right? So I always have this question, unless I have a good answer. Right? I have a possible answer. Right? The question is, why did so many people die in his name? Out of all people. You don't see a quarter, a third, a half people died in Krishna's name, per se. You can say, well, but Muslims, maybe because they go killing everybody and a lot of them get killed, right, as well. But I don't think it's close. I don't think it's close the number of people died in his name. The Crusades, other things. So the question is, why? Right? What happened over here? Well, I have a possible answer. I don't know if it's the answer. You think with a grain of salt, but I think it's a possible answer. And one answer is that, as the Gemara says, seemingly, not everyone agrees with this, but seemingly, Rabbi Shua ben Prachia had a student. Now, some say one of his students was JC. That was one of his students. Not everyone agrees he was a student, but there are a number of things that the Gemara says not necessarily in his favor or negative. So one of the stories is that he was with Yeshua ben Prachia, and he was at a hotel or an inn or whatever. And seemingly Reb Yeshua ben Prachia said something to the owner of the hotel, owner of the inn, or the owner of the inn's wife, let's say, made a comment, I don't know, whatever the comment was. And JC made a very, let's say, lewd comment. Yeah, let's say boiled down comment. So what happens? So Reb Shua ben Prachia blasted him, threw him out. Came back, asked for forgiveness, he threw him out. Came back, asked for forgiveness again, he threw him out. Third time he came back and asked for forgiveness, Reb Shua ben Prachia was in the middle of the Shema. Now, when you're saying the Shema, you can't interrupt. But he would have forgiven him. At that point, he would have forgiven him. But what was the problem? He couldn't speak. Forbidden for him to speak. But since he didn't give an answer, JC got fed up and he left. And he left in a huff and a puff. So they say, after this meeting, this third meeting with Rabbi Shua ben Prachia, and the fact that he ignored him and refused to accept his forgiveness, they say that's when he went off and did all his different things. What do you learn from this story? You learn that you draw close with one hand, you push away with the other. But you have to know how to draw close. And in this case, Rabbi Shua ben Prachia, great as he was taken to task for what happened. Why? Because he should have accepted his forgiveness. Right? He shouldn't have pushed him away so hard. You tell me he had a right to be upset? He made a disgusting comment. Okay. So everyone would agree he had a right to say what he said. And push him away. But at the same time, the claim against him was he should have also tried to draw him close. Could have had a positive influence. And by the third time, he would have done it. He would have allowed him to be forgiven. He would have forgave him. Very good. He would have forgiven him. In fact, he would have forgiven him. And he didn't because he was in the middle of the Shema. He's taking a task, and they say that he went off and did his own thing. Now, some would say that wasn't the case. But whatever he did didn't really matter. Because in the end, 200 years later, his disciples made him who he was. They spread his name, they said all kinds of things about him, right, etc. But not in his lifetime. But again, there's a big discrepancy here exactly what happened. So I'm saying a possible answer, again, I'm not saying it's the answer, possible answer was he got pushed too hard. Since he got pushed too hard, even if he deserved it, what happened? What happened? He went and did his own thing. And that Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia could have drawn him closer. And should have drawn him closer. So he's taking a task for that. Now, is someone going to say he had a right to be upset? Yes. Did he have a right to be put in his place? Yes. But there's a claim. He didn't have to push him so hard, and he could have drawn him close, still while giving him rebuke. So again, we have another Gemara that says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia had a student had trouble learning. He had to explain the lesson 400 times. But one day, he had to go somewhere, and even after 400 times, the student didn't get it. He had to explain another 400 times. Now, what happened on that day? Because the student said, once he knew that he had to leave at a certain point, he couldn't concentrate. He had difficulty concentrating. So even after 400 times, he didn't get the lesson. So he had to learn with him another 400 times. And then he got the lesson. Well, what does that tell you? That tells you he's got a lot of patience. He's got a tremendous amount of patience. So what happened over here? What happened with JC over here? He lost the school, seemingly. It's an easy explanation. Totally lost the school. Yeah, when really, he should have drawn him closer. Again, does that mean he should not have been upset? No. He had a right to be upset. 100% he had a right to be upset. They put him in his place and give him mussar. But you have to remember, sometimes if we do that, you have other people or our kids or whatever, sometimes, a person gets carried away. And they get, they get very angry, which is bad, right? And they come out too strong. That can have a tremendously negative effect. Now, doesn't mean they shouldn't give discipline. People need discipline, right? Kids need discipline, okay. But disciplining them too strongly is going to backfire. Right? Many times it'll backfire. I'm not saying it should, but it could. Punishment always has to fit the crime, and you can never punish out of anger because the kid won't get the message. But sometimes, a parent may punish. Why? Well, the kid deserves it. But how they're going to punish? They do it under, the fact that they're angry. Person's never punished out of anger. Because your mind, you don't think straight when you're angry. Right? It says in Pirkei Avos, you don't speak to a person when they're angry. But wait till the anger dissipates. Because, as the Gemara says, if a person's angry, even if the pit of hell was underneath their feet, they still won't stop. Why? Because they're angry. The pit of hell and all that, whatever it means, ain't going to change. Why? Person's in their own mentality. They're rip-roaring mad. Anyone who knows anyone else or themselves when they become rip-roaring mad, no matter what anyone says, you don't listen. Why don't you listen? Because you can't listen. You can't hear. You're rip-roaring mad. And even if you have a right to be rip-roaring mad, okay. Even if you would have a right, anger, one of the worst character traits. Everybody has anger at some level. It can cause unbelievable damage. Even when, I think the Rambam says, even when the parent has to punish and they have to show anger, yeah, they have to fake it as much as possible so they don't have a tinge of anger in their heart. So as not to punish with anger, even a little bit of anger. Because a little bit of anger is also bad. Right? So even if you have to punish and you have to show anger, you have to, first of all, you have to be like the world's greatest actor or actress, and you have to get the anger out of your system. It has to be out of your system before you do it. Because if it's not out of your system before you do it, you'll come out too strong. Or you'll punish where the child will not understand the message. All right? In other words, it could be a knee-jerk reaction. Now, a lot of things can be happening at the same time. Passover is a tremendous time to clean, and you're out, and a lot of things going on at the same time. It's a lot of pressure up against the clock, right? You got a lot of things to do, right? It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of money, right? Also, a lot of things you got to do. Okay, so like you don't have time over here. It's a chaotic time. You're lacking sleep, other things. Here in Israel, it's kind of funny in a certain way. The kids were off school because they couldn't go to school, so you have the kids at home. You need to clean, and they get sirens blaring left and right. Got to keep going to bomb shelters. I mean, it's the only crazier time, than this was during COVID. It's also a totally crazy time. But you know what? You got to try and prepare for Passover. But a person has kids at home or a number of little kids at home. It's very hard to do anything. And not only that, it's not like you can go anywhere. Well, the last few days have been like cold and rainy here, so like not really going too far anyway. But in general, like where you going? Wherever you go, you gotta know that if a siren goes off, where am I gonna, where's the bomb shelter gonna be? Right? In what vicinity? How close is it? People are not taking chances, which they shouldn't. Right? But then everyone's cooped up. You can't get out. And you gotta clean. Right? You gotta clean, do other things. You gotta get things done either way. Right? Very inconvenient time to have a war. Right? Especially right before Purim. The war started by, the next day, that's when kids dress up in school. Something like that all was canceled. Picked a good time. Okay. Yeah, whatever it is. Whatever it is, you're under pressure, you're under the gun for different things. Everyone's on top of each other, no one can get out. Right? You gotta get all this stuff done. And plus, you gotta worry. There's gonna be a siren. What's gonna be this, that? It's a crazy time. So, like, could a person's nerves be, shattered? Sure. Person have anxiety? Yes. They say, what about a moon bitachon, this and that? Okay, it's something we need to work on. For sure, but you got a lot of different things going on at the same time. Right? To overload. Kids aren't in school, people aren't really working, or maybe doing things, long distance or who knows what. And it's unnerving. And nothing's going the way we want it to. But you're gonna make the best of it. So what does it do? It throws everyone's schedule off. Right? Not to mention the fact some people, sleep deprived because sometimes in the middle of the night, you get one of these sirens and you got to get up and whatever. It's inconvenience. But sometimes things happen when you're sleep deprived also. Combine that with, you don't have kids in school and everything else, that's a lot of pressure. Right? So, it's a lot of pressure. So people are on, under the gun, no pun intended. People's nerves are shot, totally shot. They don't know where, when, this, that. You can't, no way to predict. No way to know, right? You could get get a warning beforehand. Now, the warning, just telling you, missiles will come, they might come in your vicinity. Okay. Well, not a guarantee. So then, if it does, then you hear a siren. You say, okay, but not every time you hear a siren. Yeah, in other words, then that means, it wasn't near you. Okay, but it's unnerving because, you get this warning. It's kind of an annoying warning, but it means, then, a few minutes, within 5 minutes, usually, if you're going to get a siren, you get it. If you're not going to get a siren, you won't get it. Doesn't mean you don't hear the booms and everything else, but, it's there's a lot of things going on in the world, right? Not just here, but there's a lot of things going on in the world, in general. Especially at a time when it's extremely busy, and everyone's around. Everyone would be around now anyway, right? Right about now, week before Passover, everyone's off school, right? Everyone would be off school. So everyone's home, okay? Yeah, but this is going on for like 3 weeks. Not just a week. Yeah, 2 weeks also. Those 2 weeks, the kids are out, you get more done. You get a lot more done, but it's harder. Right? So so in that sense, it's got a lot of other things going on. But let's say that wasn't the case, right? So still, a parent should never punish when they're angry. Shouldn't be a knee-jerk reaction. Because a knee-jerk reaction, you get burnt. You'll get burnt. You may do something you shouldn't do, you say something you shouldn't do, and throughout the whole thing, the child will not get the message. And that's the worst thing. Then the person yelling and screaming, and what does the child see? Whatever they did, the parent is out of control. And when a person's angry, they're out of control. Right? As the Gemara says, if the pit of Gehenna was open in front of them, they'd still be out of control. It wouldn't make any imprint on their life. That's what anger does. So it comes on the Rambam. The Rambam says, if you have to punish and you have to show anger, you better know how to fake it. Don't leave one tinge of anger inside. Not one. Gotta be the world's greatest actor or actress. Right? Then, you can punish them. So someone's gonna say, but who's doing that? Who has the ability to do that? It's hard. I'm not gonna say no. It's hard. Because we're annoyed, we're tired, we're this, we got a lot of work to do, blah, blah, blah. When the kid did this, that, and the other thing, it's gotta be punished. It has to be disciplined. Right? Says King Solomon Proverbs, if you don't discipline, right? If you spare the rods, you're considered cruel. It doesn't mean corporal punishment. It means to discipline. Kids need discipline, whether they think they do or not. They need discipline. They need boundaries. You can't look at the world as Hefker. That's ownerless. I can do whatever I want. Can't do that. They don't want that. They want discipline. Even if they don't admit it. They want discipline. Okay. Now, even wanting discipline, sometimes you gotta punish. Okay. We have to know how to punish. And says the Rambam, you have to know how to act. To be a big actor or actress over here. Because punishment out of anger never works. Just the opposite. The punishment will probably be too harsh, and the kid won't get it. That is the problem. Right? That is seemingly seemingly the problem. Yeah, let me take other questions. Someone asked, ever going to be on Talk Talk again? I tend to doubt it, but never say never. Yeah, you never know, but I don't see it at this time. Somebody asked, heard yesterday, many people that many Jews are leaving for Egypt to get out of Israel. Yes. Why are they leaving? Why are they leaving through Egypt? Because they can't get out. There are people that need to get back to the States or wherever they need to go. There are no flights going on. So we have emergency flights coming in, right, that allow flying people in order that they're stuck. There are hundreds of thousands of people out, Israelis outside of Israel that are stuck. They want to come back. Right? So they have these special flights. Yeah, but what about people leaving? Can't get on flights. Or even if you get on a flight, you'd be lucky. There are 25 people on a flight, 50 people on a flight. So what some people are doing is a pain in the arm or leg to get down to Eilat. And from Eilat, you go to Egypt, you go to the border of Taba. You go to Egypt, and then you take a flight, goes to Europe, and then from there you go to the States. Expensive. It's going to be very expensive. I know a number of people did this. Yeah, I mean, not personally, but, I know of stories where a lot of people did that. And that's the only way to get out. I mean, it's not like, no missiles flying around a lot either. They're also having issues. But that's the only way because airports pretty much shut down. Yeah, and it's going to be shut down for certainly in the near future. So there again, people in the States, Israelis that try to get back here, they're getting them back here slowly, but they're getting them back here. You got more than 100,000 people stranded there, right? But to get out, it's a different issue. Getting out, it's a bigger problem, and the reason is because no one's flying. So the only way to get out, essentially, is to go through Egypt, right? You go through the border, and then from Egypt, you fly to Europe and then to the States, wherever you need to go. I did hear of a story of somebody that needed to go to Australia. Yeah, so what they do? They went to Taba, went to Egypt, flew to America, and then flew to Australia. That's how they got out. That's a crazy thing. Take you days. Take you 2-3 days. It's crazy. Yeah, but that's what some people have done because that's the only way to get out. That is the only way to get out. At the moment, it's to go that way. There's no other route. You're not going through Jordan. You can't fly out of there. So you go to Egypt. It takes 3-4 hours to get to Eilat certainly by car, and then you have to go to the border, and then whatever get a ticket going to either Europe or to the States, or whatever. So are there people doing that? Yeah. So they paying through the nose? Absolutely. That's how they're getting out. That's how they're getting out. Right? Coming back is a different issue. Coming back, has different flights. Getting people out was also a problem. There were enough flights out taking a lot of people. Whatever, it's a big mess. It's a big mess right now. Somebody asks, what kind of work will exist in the Messianic era and after? So, first of all, we already are in the Messianic era. I assume what you mean is when the Messiah comes. When the Messiah comes, the Rambam says, this world that we live in now and when the Messiah comes is going to be the same. It's not going to be that much different. So there'll be plenty of things that will need to be done even then. Right? Even then. So according to others, it's going to be a totally different world. So it's going to be a totally different world. I can't answer. Can't answer what's going to be. Yeah, if according to the Rambam and others, it's going to stay the same, seemingly, if it's going to stay the same, then it'll stay the same, right? That'll stay the same. The question is going to be, what's going to happen afterwards? What's going to happen after that great judgment and the resurrection of the dead? Right? No question when that period is. Right? Olam Haba will be after the coming of the Messiah, resurrection of the dead after that. Question is, the world going to get destroyed or not? Right? First. So the world's going to exist for 6,000 years, 1,000 years for each day of creation. So you got 6,000 years, another 200 so on years. So you got 6,000 years after that. It's like Shabbos, like the seventh day. Whole world gets flattened. Seems like the Gemara says, whoever's around doesn't die at that point, going to be flying around, seemingly. Know exactly what that means. And then you have 1,000 years in between, and then the world's going to be rebuilt, and then there's going to be resurrection. Now, whoever gets up at resurrection on that day of great judgment, it is brought down. We're going to have some sort of different. Whoever gets up, it's going to have a different type of body. What type of body? Nobody knows. As wherever this once, and he said another type of body. We don't know what it is. I asked him a second time, and he said, I never met anyone who's been in that world and come back. So the answer is, we don't know. Some sort of, I don't know, whatever it is, different type of body. Now, the question is, okay, we're not going to have an evil inclination for sure. We're not going to have necessarily the same type of body. What's the world going to look like? What are we going to do? Exactly. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. What's going to be? The answer is we don't know. That's the answer. We don't know what it's going to be. Are people really going to work? Going to need to work? Are they really going to just be spiritual beings in some sort of body, but not have same bodily needs? I mean, that sounds like the case. Person's not going to have any desires or whatever because we won't have an evil inclination, right? So what's going to be? I don't know. Nobody seems to know. It's very unclear. In the time when the Messiah comes, according to the Rambam, there won't be any difference. There won't be too much difference between this world and the next, right? Right after that, it's going to be Olam Haba, what we call the next world. Yeah, that might not be a big difference between what's going on now, and then. Right? But again, other people say it's going to be more spiritual, even if you're in a physical body. So, hard to say. You're gonna say, according to the Rambam, okay, be doing similar things, right? According to others, we don't know, right? We don't, we don't know. Yeah, let me see if there are other questions here. What is the Messianic era? The era we're living in right now. A lot of signs. There are 15 signs. What are the 15 signs of the Messianic era? One is chutzpah will increase. General lack of shame. Second is inflation will soar, right? Economic instability. Third is extravagant prices for produce. Yeah, the vine will yield fruit, wine will be expensive, government corruption, scholarly gathering place will become bordellos. Centers of order will be desecrated. Galilee will be destroyed, right? Certainly a certain type of regional desolation. Highlands will be desolate. Border people will wander, meaning intellectuals or people. A borderland will go from city to city. No one will show them compassion. Wisdom of authors will stink. Intellectual pursuits will be despised. Sin-fearing people will be detested. I mean, a lot of good things here, right? Young men will humiliate the elderly. So you look at all these things. I'm not going to delve into them, but you look at all these things. They're all what we see going on today, more or less. Chutzpah will increase. That there's nothing to talk about. Inflation, extravagant prices, government corruption. Yeah. Truth will be missing. Elderly will stand while the young sit. The young will mock the elders. All these things are happening. Every last one of these things are happening. Yeah. So that means that we're living in a time. We're living in a time before the Messiah comes. Right? In other words, certain things have to happen. So Gemara says there are 15 signs. Right? We read some of them. Some of those signs. So those signs today, what does that show? It shows that the Messiah is really close. That's what it shows. But, it's preparation, let's say better. Preparation for the coming of the Messiah. So if there's preparation for the coming of the Messiah, you still need the Messiah to come. Right? But the generation or generations before the Messiah comes, it's called the Messianic era. Right? And that's the era we're living in now. Will a Noahide that is cremated against their will be in the resurrection? Yes. A Jew would be the same thing. In other words, it's really not forbidden for a Noahide to be cremated, right? But let's say a Noahide got cremated. Yeah, against their will. Yeah, it was done against their will. So they didn't have intention. It's not what they wanted. So therefore, so God can do anything. He can gather their ashes together and resurrect them. Right? The question is, if it's done against their will, yes. What if it's done willingly? What if a Jew or non-Jew willingly got cremated? Now, by a non-Jew, I don't think it matters. It doesn't really matter, even if they did it willingly. It doesn't go against the Noahide laws per se. Should be okay. Should be okay according, for Noahide. Right? For Jews, it's totally forbidden if you do it willingly. Totally forbidden. Now, if that's the case, then if a Jew gets cremated willingly, that goes against 13 principles of faith. That goes against resurrection of the dead. Because what they're saying is, I don't need the body, I don't need anything, just burn me up, light me up, let's say. So that what happens? That they deny one of the 13 principles of faith. Anyone who denies one of the 13 principles of faith as a Jew, technically no longer has the status of a Jew unless they repent. If they don't repent, they're in trouble. So if they reject any of these principles, i.e., God is absolute, resurrection of the dead, coming of the Messiah, reward and punishment, if they deny any of these, unless they repent, they're in trouble. They're in serious trouble. So if a Jew doesn't care, and they say willingly, when they die, cremate me, there's a problem. They won't get up a resurrection. They have to repent. Well, it's going to be hard to repent. They're already dead. Right? But if they go against any of these principles and do not repent, they're in trouble. If they repent before they die, very good. If they don't repent before they die, they're in trouble. So they wouldn't get up a resurrection. Right? But it wouldn't apply to a non-Jew because a non-Jew could be cremated. Right? It doesn't go against the Noahide laws. If non-Jew doesn't want to be cremated, okay, but it doesn't go against the Noahide laws. What happens when a Jewish court rejects someone's birur yadut? Yeah, in other words, clarification of their Judaism when they have accepted that person's sibling's birur yadut prior. Ooh. What can someone do who is planning to do an Orthodox conversion to prevent such a matter happening to their children? All right, let's answer the first question first. If somebody is known to be Jewish, right? If somebody is known to be Jewish, or they clarify it, they clarify their Judaism. Yeah, very good. So let's say it's accepted, right? Let's say it's accepted. Now, what about a sibling? What about a sibling? They reject. Now the question is why they rejected. If they're siblings, they should accept it. Yeah. If they're the same family, same bloodline, they should accept it. So there's got to be some other issue why they didn't accept it. Right? Why they didn't accept it. So I would have to hear the details of the case, why they didn't accept it. Why they accepted one and not the other. Right? That's kind of dodgy. Right? That needs an explanation. Why are you going to accept one and not the other? There have to be other facts in the case. Why they wouldn't accept it. Now, so okay, that's the first thing. What can someone who's planning on doing Orthodox conversion do to prevent such matter happening to their children? If they're going to the right path, yeah, they convert, then the children are automatically Jewish. Yeah, children are automatically Jewish. Now, let's say the children are older, they convert with a parent. Yeah, when the child is old enough, they're going to ask, they want to convert or not. But even as a child, could the basin, let's say the basin will say that the child is Jewish. Okay. But the basin is only going to say that on the basis of how the child's going to be brought up. And the child's going to be brought up, the way they should, then there shouldn't be an issue. There shouldn't be an issue. Now, all things being equal, if the parents are doing the right thing, there should be a question on the children. There shouldn't be a question over here, right? I would say 95% of the time should not be an issue. There could be other issues, right? But I would say that shouldn't happen. In majority of cases, it shouldn't happen. Now, what can someone who's planning to do an Orthodox conversion do to prevent such a matter happening? Right? No guarantee. There's absolutely zero guarantee over here. Right? There's zero guarantee. There's zero guarantee what's going to be. You have two guarantees in life, as we always say, death and taxes. You're right. So I'll say it like this: if the conversion's done properly, and it's a proper rabbinical court, there should not be an issue. There should not be an issue. Now, is that a guarantee? Not a guarantee. Right? It's only not a guarantee. Right? I get this question all the time. You send me to a rabbinical court, how do I know it's going to be guaranteed? How do I know in 20 years I'm not going to have a problem? You don't. You don't know there's not going to be a problem in 20 years. There shouldn't be. If it's a proper rabbinical court, you should not have a problem. Could there be an issue? There could be. No one's infallible over here, right? But, again, if it's a proper rabbinical court, all things being equal, there should not be a problem. There should not be an issue later. Now, could there be? In theory. But again, so someone will ask, well, am I going to get questioned 2 years down the line? No. Shouldn't. Well, 5 years down the line. Shouldn't. What if, let's say, the rabbinical court that did the conversion, right? Let's say 10 years later, they start doing dodgy conversions. Yeah, they're doing things they shouldn't do. Let's say. Now, the problem is, if that's the case, going forward, I would say don't use that rabbinical court. Okay. Well, what about all prior conversions? How do you know they weren't dodgy before? Now, there was a case, somebody was doing conversions for like 10, 15 years, they were okay. And 10, 15 years after that, no one accepts them. Right? So what about the previous years? Are they good or not? Right? So some would say, if you want to get out of the problem, go to another rabbinical court and do a gerus chumrah. Do a stringent conversion. You're already probably Jewish, but you're going to do a stringent conversion. You're not going to have to go through all the classes or whatever. They'll do it pretty quick, and that's it. Yeah, if that's someone who wants to get out of a doubt, right? Not have any doubt. You can do that. But I would say, in the bigger scheme of things, if the rabbinical court is okay in general, then there's nothing to worry about. You can always say, in the future something could happen. Yes, something could happen. Are the odds? Most people know, I'm big into statistics. Are the odds that, are there strong odds that something's going to happen? He'll say it depends on the rabbinical court. Okay, but if it's a proper rabbinical court, that shouldn't be. Should not happen. Should not have anything to worry about. Again, someone would say, I want a guarantee. No. Is there, can you give me a guarantee? No. I wouldn't give a guarantee in that. I would say, this is a proper rabbinical court, right? Go there, it should be fine. Can I say 100%? In 10 years, 15, 20 years, there should be no problem? I can say 100%. I can say maybe 80%. Yeah, I can say I don't think there's going to be a problem here. Could something happen? Something could happen. What's the probability? The rabbinical court has been around 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It had very few problems. Yeah, if any. So, you go to a proper rabbinical court, it's not something you have to worry about. You can always second guess. You can always say, well, You never know. Okay, you never know, but you put your best foot forward and do what you need to do. It's a proper rabbinical court, shouldn't be an issue. Could one of the rabbis under rabbinical court go rogue after, so many years? Would I say they will? I can't say anything. Hopefully not. Hopefully not. Nobody knows what's going to be. Right? But if you go to a proper rabbinical court, it shouldn't be a problem. That's what I would say. I can tell you over the last 20 years, any rabbinical court I've sent to, there hasn't been a problem with the rabbinical court itself. So, that's pretty good. When I say it's 100% guaranteed, I wouldn't say it's guaranteed. Nothing's guaranteed. Right? But I would say that the odds are very strong that nothing should happen. Yeah, and here's something would. Let's say something happens. Let's say somewhere down the line something happens. Okay, one worst case scenario, you get a gears of Go to another rabbinical court and do that. Say, how do you know it's not going to happen there either? No guarantees in life, right? Except death and tax. Right? Those are the only guarantees. So, part of my job is to make sure rabbinical court's a good rabbinical court. Yeah, and that's what it should be. Yeah, that's what it should be. So like I said, the last 20 years, I haven't had an issue. That was someone did have an issue with the rabbinical court, and they had to go through a Gerus Chumrah here. Okay. Right? But that was like, weird circumstances. So again, I'm not saying it can't happen. Definitely not saying it can't happen. Right? But if it's the proper rabbinical court, it shouldn't happen. Right? It shouldn't happen. Right? So, again, I'll tell people, I'll make sure the rabbinical court's a good rabbinical court and all that. Very good. That's it. It should be questioned. Could something happen 20 years down the line? Anything could happen. Who knows what could happen? Right? Will it happen? Probably not. Right? These cases are not so common. They're not very common. The case I was involved in was a strange case. Another rabbi went off the rails, so to speak. Can happen. It certainly can happen. But I wouldn't say that you should expect that by any stretch. I wouldn't say that at all. Now, there is another issue. The other issue is you don't have a across the board all rabbinical courts recognize other rabbinical courts. Some are more stringent, less stringent, this and that. So that you have an issue with. That there's an issue. Right? In other words, they may say so. I hear all the time people want to come to Israel and convert here. Chief Rabbi, it's not all what it's caked up to be. Yeah, I'm not going to go into so many details, but it's not all what it's caked up to be. There are rabbinical courts. I would just say this. There are rabbinical courts in the world that if someone converted, let's say by the chief rabbinate in Israel, they will not accept it. They will not accept it. Why not? Because they don't like what they do. Yeah. So you can say, well, how do I know rabbinical court I'm going to go to will be accepted? Because again, that's part of my job. Make sure that it's a rabbinical court that should have relatively good acceptance around the world. Right? And that's important because you don't want to second guess. But there's no universal standard. There was a group that was trying to make a universal standard, and they flopped miserably in many ways. They don't exist anymore, essentially, right? But I would say, that's not a bad idea if it's done right. But you got to get all these different bodies to agree on what the standard is. Well, not, and not everyone is holding by the same standard. Some are more stringent, less stringent, more books to read, less books to read. It's not universal. When someone has the knowledge, right? What does a non-Jew have to know? They have to know how to read Hebrew. It doesn't matter how they speak, right? They speak Hebrew like an Israeli. They have to know how to pray, right? They have to know how to read from a prayer book. They have to know the laws of blessings. They have to know the laws of kashrus. They have to know the laws of Shabbos. And they have to know all the holidays and the 13 principles of faith. If someone knows this relatively well, and they go to a good rabbinical court, that it shouldn't matter. Should not be an issue. Now, let's say something happens to that rabbinical court. Okay, 20 years later. Now, if they want, they can go to another rabbinical court and say, yeah, I took this class, I learned, I went through all this, and it'll be a quick process. Won't be a long process, to do. Right? That's the worst case scenario. That's the worst case scenario. But again, can it happen? It can. I'm big into statistics. When I say it's going to happen, no. I would say it's very rare or slim that it should happen. I'm not going to give a guarantee 100%, right? Because it could happen in theory, but the odds are slim. The odds are very slim. What are the few items I mentioned that? What happened? Again, what happens if a rabbinical court? You have one of the rabbis. This goes off the rails. So now you have a rabbinical court of 2. In order to convert, you need a rabbinical court of 3. So then you have to have another gerus, a gerus l'chumrah, right? A stringent conversion. But again, after the fact, it's going to be a much easier process, right? And they're only doing it to clarify their status. Yeah, because they know their status should be fine, right? But now you got one of these rabbis that went off or whatever, and now it's what's going to be calls into question 20 years later. Yeah. So at the end of the day, is the conversion kosher? Yeah, it's probably kosher. Probably don't have to do anything. What would most people want to do though? They want to clarify it. Right? This happened with somebody, and there were people that did a stringent conversion. That's what they did. Right? And that was it. So again, what does the person have to know? Kashrus, prayer, 13 principles of faith, Shabbos, all the holidays. Right? Blessings. God blessings. Right? They're like 6 things. 6 things, they have to know. They have to know them well, relatively well. So a person converted, very good. So they went to the material. They can say, I went through all this. I learned all this. I keep all this. That's it. That's what it is. They're not going to, again, according to some rabbinical courts, they make you read more books, some less books. I mean, there's plenty more to learn even after conversion. Right? But a person said, this is what I did. This was my intention. I took all these classes, blah, blah, blah. I had all this knowledge. I passed. I was a Jew, and now I'm stuck in limbo because of what happened in this rabbinical court. It's going to be a very quick process. Right? I had somebody here, it took them, I don't know, a few months. Right? They already had their kids in school, so they didn't have a problem that way. But it took whatever. I worked with them for a few months. And the first of all, rabbinical court they had their conversion from this other rabbinical court. They knew I was working with them for a few months. I taught them, spoke to them, this, that, brought it back to the rabbinical court, and that was it. 2 months. Whatever, it's a few months. Right? It's not a very long process. It shouldn't be a very long process. Right? But again, I don't think they're going to retest a person. I don't think they're going to go that far. Right? But they want them maybe to take some, refresher classes or whatever, and it's good. Right? It shouldn't be a big deal. Should not be a big deal. Right? But you got to know, obviously, rabbinical court is going to ask you what you learned. Those are the main things, right? Blessings, kashrus, prayer, 13 principles of faith, Shabbos, and blessings, plus all the holidays, right? So 6 things. All right, 6 things plus all the holidays. The person can say, I went through them, whatever. Okay. Yeah. They may want you to read some things, I don't know, but it shouldn't be very long. Should not be very long. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, what's my opinion on? Let's see how fast you can type. Yeah, a comment made by Rabbi Tovia Singer. Okay, yeah, what was the comment? The comment is, oh, anyone who wants to convert Judaism in Latin America encounter many difficulties. Yes, that's true. Orthodox in Latin America almost not been existed, and they don't. Right? When they do, it's not recognized, right? Not by local Jewish communities. Yeah. Dear Rabbi's message for you. You live with Islamic countries. So many people Jewish descendant must return to the Jewish people. By not allowing this, you're delaying the mission of the Jewish people. Bring Tikkun Olam to the world. All right, that's true to a point. But what are you supposed to do? This question comes up, a lot. There are no rabbinical courts in Central America. Yeah, yeah, or Latin America. Right? There are not. Now, in some countries, they'll say convert somewhere else, we'll accept it. Okay, but they don't do their own conversions. Right? Now people will say, well, they're not doing their job and you're stopping people from coming back to Jewish people. That's true. That is true. If these people are legitimate and they should convert, okay, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? They live in these places. Take a place like the Philippines. They did conversion a while ago, a number of years ago. In order to do conversion there, right, you have to bring rabbis there to do it. It's not impossible to do. They brought, 3 rabbis from Jerusalem to do it. Yeah, there are other issues, though. There are other issues. Not just cost issues. There are other issues. But in these other places, yeah, it's a problem. Yeah, for the most part, I would agree with that. That there are non-Jews out there that should be Jewish. Okay, but I tell people the same thing. Yeah, I get badgered by someone from somewhere. I don't know if the person legit or not. I mean, claim to be legit. Okay, yeah. In their case, they don't have a Jewish community, so converting them doesn't do anything because they're going to be on their own anyway. So at the end of the day, you got to get out of Dodge. You got to move. You got to get to a Jewish community. If you can't get to a Jewish community, you can't convert. That's not the same question. Here, let's say you have a community. You made a community. Not you, whatever. There's already a community established. So they're saying we don't want to deal with conversion. We've had problems with conversion, i.e., fake converts, let's say. So they've had fake converts and many issues. So they don't want to deal with conversion. They don't want to deal with conversion. Because they've had too many problems. Their rabbinical courts in the States will not deal with converts for that reason. They got burnt. Now, is it their responsibility because there's so many non-Jews, that want to convert? You say, oh, you're shirking responsibility. They took on responsibility and they got burnt. Now, they get all the transgressions. So the rabbinical court that signs off on a conversion gets all the transgressions also. It's a huge responsibility. And if a person gets burnt, and a lot of, I don't know what the stats are, but, there are converts that even after conversion don't stay Jewish. I don't know what the stats are. My stats are 100%. I haven't had anyone gone sour afterwards. Now, I'm not, saying that to brag. I got, plenty of other things to brag about. That's not one of them. Right? But I mention it because I keep people in line. If they have questions, they normally come to me. So I can help them, usually. Not always, but usually. Right? So what do you do when converts are giving the Jewish people a bad name? A, right? They cause all kinds of problems by going off. B, so why should they convert them? They don't want the responsibility. Right? That's not what he's saying. He's saying, like I've heard others say, you gotta, strengthen up and you gotta do it because they deserve to be converted. Now, I wouldn't necessarily disagree if that's true. If that's true. But you gotta, first of all, you have to have big shoulders here, and B, is not so simple. Why in certain places do they not do conversion? Now, in some places they won't do it because the community is too small, right? So they have to move, right? I knew somebody where they were in Zimbabwe, former Zimbabwe. Yeah, the community there was like less than 100 people, tiny. No point doing conversion there. They don't do conversion there anyway, but the community's tiny, right? So they moved. They picked up and went. What are you doing at people in India? Let's say get contacted by people from India. Well, yeah, they need to move. They don't do conversion there, and the community's tiny there, so you have to get out. A lot of people in India are poor. So what are you supposed to do? This is a big problem. There's another issue. It's poverty. Now the question is: are they converting because they think Jews have money, they're going to help them, or they're converting because they want to be the real deal? Now, let's say you do have some that are the real deal. Yeah, it's not because they're getting out of their money situation. Yeah. So there should be Jewish money helping them. Yeah, what's the problem? I shouldn't laugh. Sad. What's the problem? What's the obvious problem? There are 150,000, groups to give to, under the umbrella of Judaism that people are going to help before they help non-Jews. After conversion, it's a different issue. But a lot of non-Jews need help before conversion. So there was someone who wanted to, set up a fund, get people to donate, to help non-Jews the process of conversion. Didn't really get off the ground. Right? Need probably a few wealthy, converts to be able to get this initiative off the ground. Yeah. Well, why did it get off the ground? Because Jews won't give to it. Because they're not Jewish. Doesn't mean they're not serious. But you have to understand, what's the percentage of non-Jews interested in conversion end up finishing? It's not a high percentage. So you can help somebody and they flake out and they don't convert. Or they do convert and they go off. So why should I give the money to that? You got rabbinic scholars to give to, you got girls' schools, you got boys' schools, you got yeshivas, you got all kinds of things to give to, needy brides, orphans. I mean, I can think of a lot of groups, that money could go to and help. I'm not saying this is not an important cause. Yeah, in the bigger scheme of things, it's at the bottom. Right, it's totally at the bottom. Yeah, they should be helped. I'm not saying that. If I had serious money, I would put money up for it. Because I know there's serious people, but they have to be vetted. They for sure have to be vetted. Yeah, because there are other people who are just going to do it for money. Just be helped out of their own situation. Right? So this is a problem if you have religious communities. If you have religious communities. If you have a tiny community, of course they're not going to do it. Doesn't make sense. Right? If they have a nice sized community, so you tell me they should fly people in and do it. Good. That's stopping people from converting. Okay. But people have been burned for so long, they're not going to do it. Right? Even if that's true, they're not going to do it. Think about, funding the money, to get people to come, to get a rabbinical court to come and all that. Yeah, and let's say you find the money, okay. But to get people to come and do it, that's the issue. They won't do it. Yeah, the Syrian community does not do conversion at all, period. They don't want conversion. They don't do it. If you convert somewhere else, they won't accept you. Right? Whether it's right, whether it's wrong, they won't accept you either way. You get been converted by Moshe Rabbeinu, they won't accept you. Yeah, that's their community, but they don't want problems. They do not want to have problems, so they will not do conversion, period. You can say that's wrong. That's racist. Okay. But they won't do it. They will not do it because they've had problems in the past. So they don't want it. They don't want any convert coming in. So I get this question. I say, go somewhere else. Why do you have to be Syrian? Go somewhere else. Be Sephardic. Somewhere else. Be Ashkenazic. I don't know. Be Hasidic. So you won't be Syrian. Being Syrian, being a convert and living in a Syrian community is the end to end all things? I don't know. Plenty of other religious communities to go to. They're the only one that will not do conversion at all, period. They won't accept them, period. Okay. It's their choice. Anyway, that's not the question. The question is you have communities that could bring in a rabbinical court or have a rabbinical court there, and they won't do it. That's a problem. I hear that. I don't think they're going to change their mind. Yeah, I don't think they're interested in changing their mind because they've had issues, right? What could you answer to that? Yeah, responsibility. It's a huge responsibility. They don't want the responsibility. Like I say, it's not right. It's not this. You're not signing off on it. You don't get the transgressions if they go off. It's a huge responsibility. And they've had problems in the past. So if they had problems in the past, why would they do it? That's what they say, go somewhere else. Right? It's a way of blowing people off. That's one thing. Right? Because then you're going to say, well, I have to get somewhere. Yeah, and I have to get money to get somewhere. I have to go live somewhere for a certain amount of time to do it. Yeah, it's not easy. I agree. Right? But if people have been burnt a number of times, they're not going to do it. When you say it's right or wrong, that's one of the reasons. So but they're stopping people from converting. Okay. And you'll tell me they should take greater responsibility. Okay, would you? A lot of people don't want it. They don't want that aggravation. Because it's a serious thing. It's not a make-believe thing. And there's serious repercussions if they don't do what they're supposed to do. So you say, but how do you know? Maybe they will. Maybe they'll be the best, converts in the world, maybe. But the track record shows not that way. Statistics show not that way. Right? So if that's the case, are people going to chance it? I don't think they're going to chance it. That's why they won't do it. In general. But again, a person will say, but, they're stopping people from being Jewish. Okay, I agree. I agree. Yeah, I'll give you an example. In Colombia, South America, there's a Hasidic community there. Satmar Hasidic community there. They have a lot of converts there. But Satmar has brought in a rabbinical court to convert them. Yeah. Okay, so they have money to bring them in, they train them, and this and that. They want to be Satmar Hasidim. Okay. So if the person wanted to go do that, they could be there. Right? But that's a what do you call it? Yeah, that's what we call a Yotze Dofen. That's an exception. Most places, I get contacted from people, in Latin America. There's nothing there. Right, someone was probably Jewish. They were in where are they? Nicaragua. They're in Nicaragua. They couldn't prove it. Why couldn't they prove it? Because Noriega came on the scene. What did he do? Destroyed all Jewish cemeteries. Totally destroyed all Jewish cemeteries. No records. Now they're probably Jewish, let's say, but they can't move and they can't get out. And not to mention, there's very few Jews there. So what do you do? It's sad. Well, what can you do? Bring Jews there in a place where it's nothing and build up Nicaragua? What's the best thing to do? Is get out of Dodge. Well, what if you can't? Sometimes you can. So now the question is God going to look down on them if they can't get out? No. If they can't, they're on their own. It's beyond their capability. If it's beyond their capability, God's not going to judge them like that. They can't. There's no possible way for them to do it. But say, hey, what about the Jewish community? And they had money and they could help. Still an onus. I mean, I know someone told me this 20 years ago. Maybe a little more, about 20 years ago, I'd say. I want to set up a place for converts to live in a certain area. Different apartments and have somebody watch them and whatever. Couldn't raise money for it. There are a lot of Jewish causes you can raise money for. This is not one of them. Unless you find, either a Baal Tshuva or a convert that has money, and they'll put their money where their mouth is. Again, right or wrong, that is the case. So I don't think this person necessarily gave up on the idea, right? But it's a lost cause because they're not going to get money towards it. Jews won't get money towards it. Nicaragua was a fun fight. Okay. 1 second. What's the mission of the Jew? To be a light into nations. The mission is to keep the word of God and do whatever they're supposed to do to the best of their ability. Not to reach out to non-Jews, that's not our job. We have to be the best Jews we can be. Non-Jews will learn from that. They'll come and they'll want to learn Torah. Whether they convert or not doesn't matter. Right? That's our mission. Our mission is to be the best Jews we can be. And that when we're out there, a non-Jew says, oh, thank God his Rebbe taught him Torah, thank God his father taught him Torah, right? We should be exemplary in the eyes of the world. Now, we don't always do that, but that's our job. To keep Torah mitzvahs to the best of our ability. That's our job. Not to convert other people, but to be an example. To be an example to others. Someone says, grew up being wealthy, under Torah's holding tight fist. Okay, listen, if you have money, that's part of the test. Is to help others, right? It's a big test. And so some people say, I wish I had that test. It's a big test. People have money, right? Why did God give it to them? To help others. Rightfully help others, not give money to people who are going to waste it or whatever, right? But that's part of the test. Not only that, well, that they shouldn't be haughty. They shouldn't be conceited because they have money. It's a big test. Because if you have money, you think you do anything. Everyone's got the biggest, faith in the world, when the bank account is loaded. Yeah. Does that mean they're going to help money? But why did God give them money in the first place? To help others. But that's exactly the test. That's exactly the test. Yeah, to get to help others. That's why God gave it to you. And if you don't, you're in trouble. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, there are no other questions. I'm going to sign out. I do this every Tuesday and Thursday. I go recent time. Usually 5 o'clock Israel time. We'll change the clocks tonight, so everything goes back to normal. I know it doesn't change the clocks. Next week, I don't think there'll be Q&As because of the Passover. But I just every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock Israel time. You can find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com. Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos, Q&As, ethics for our fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email? RabbiChaimKaufman@gmail.com, RBBIChaimCoffman@gmail.com, which have a good beginning of the day, middle of the day, end of the day.